You know that feeling when you're learning a language and grammar just feels like this huge wall, like baffling rules popping up just when you think you're making progress?
Oh, definitely. Like trying to build IKEA furniture with instructions in, well, another language entirely.
Exactly. That frustration, that sense that grammar is just this rigid, fixed thing. That's really what we're digging into today.
Yeah, absolutely. We're diving deep into language and focusing on grammar, but maybe not in the way you'd expect. We're not talking about, dusty old rule books.
Right.
Our exploration is kind of inspired by Diane Larson Freeman's book, Teaching Language,
Mm.
From Grammar to Grammaring. It's quite thought-provoking.
And what I really like, and what we're trying to do here too, is that it's not just one single perspective. Her
Yeah.
book pulls together voices from, actual teachers, academic theories, research.
It's a real mix.
Hmm.
Real-world experience alongside the frameworks and investigations. And that's our plan, too, to give you multiple angles on this often tricky part of language.
So the mission for you listening today, it's really to get a more, let's say, nuanced and useful handle on grammar, moving away from just memorizing rules.
Exactly. Shifting from that static knowledge to something more dynamic, more like a skill you can actually apply. Think of this as a bit of a shortcut to understanding the core issues, moving towards actually using grammar effectively.
Okay, so where do we start? The book kicks off with a really basic but huge question. What actually is language?
Yeah, and it turns out, maybe unsurprisingly, there's no single simple answer. The first chapter lays out, I think, 10 different ways to define
It's
it.
10. Wow. Okay, so it's not just words and sentences then.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Language can be seen as, well, a means of interaction, obviously, but also a tool for doing things, a vehicle for meaning, even an instrument of power,
Mm.
and, a way to learn other things. And just holistic discourse. It covers a lot of ground.
10 definitions. That really shows how complex it is, something we use every day without thinking too much about it. But why start there? How does defining language actually, impact how we teach it or learn it? What's the core idea?
That's a really crucial point. The book argues pretty strongly that your underlying idea of what language is directly shapes your choices.
Choices like what you teach or how you study.
Both, yeah. It influences the syllabus, the learning theories you buy into, the actual teaching practices you use. Your fundamental beliefs about language really do drive your practical approach. That's the key insight.
Can you give us an example? Make that connection a bit more concrete.
Sure. Um, think about structural linguistics. That view, which is definition number 3 in the book, basically saw language as pattern, sound, sign sentences.
Okay.
Well, that view heavily influenced the audiolingual method, ALM. Remember all mimicry and memorization
Oh,
drills?
yeah, the repeat after me stuff.
Exactly. The whole idea was about forming new habits to replace your first language habits.
Hmm.
And that came directly from seeing language primarily as a system of forms.
Got it. That connection is much clearer now. So, if the definition of language matters, what's the book's big idea about grammar? It talks about grammaring. That sounds active.
It is. That's the core contrast. Traditional grammar is often seen as this static body of knowledge, rules, norms, parts of speech, things you know.
Right.
Grammaring, on the other hand, is framed as a dynamic skill, a process. It's about being able to actually use grammar effectively in the moment.
Not just knowing the rules on paper.
Precisely. The key insight is shifting the goal from just knowing grammar rules to actively using them to make meaning.
And why is that shift from grammar to grammaring so important for, learners or teachers? What's the practical difference?
Usability, really.
Mhm.
When grammar is just facts, it often stays. Well, the book calls it inert.
Inert, like stuck.
Yeah. Stuck knowledge. You might ace the test, but still freeze up when you try to speak or write. Grammaring aims to make grammar more accessible, a tool you can actually pick up and use to express yourself and understand others in real situations.
Okay, so it's not just about ticking the correct form box. What other sort of common ideas about grammar does the book push back on? I bet I hold some of these.
Well, a big one is that idea that grammar is only about accuracy of form. Is the sentence put together right?
Yeah, that's usually the main focus.
But the book argues it's equally about meaningfulness. Does it make sense in context? And appropriateness. Is it the right way to say it here and now?
That really rings true. Like the example in the book, you could say a pencil's on the table if someone asked for something to write with, but
But there is a pencil on the table. Just fits better, doesn't it? Because you're introducing something new, something the listener wasn't necessarily thinking about. It's about the flow of information.
right. And it goes deeper than just single words, too. Something about the structures themselves having meaning.
Yes, exactly. Grammatical constructions carry their own meaning. like the ditransitive structure Pat showed Bill the letter. That pattern itself, subject causes first object to receive second object, carries that meaning, regardless of the specific words you plug in.
Huh. That's fascinating. The arrangement itself is meaningful. So what about the idea that if you just learn all the rules, you're golden? I definitely spent hours memorizing verb conjugations.
Yeah, the book challenges that directly.
Yeah.
Just knowing a rule doesn't mean you'll remember it or use it correctly when you actually need it, in the heat of communication.
So memorization isn't enough.
Not on its own. That's why the author really emphasizes understanding the reasons behind the rules, the why. It helps learners grasp the underlying logic, makes it feel less random, less arbitrary.
And that helps with applying the rules and maybe understanding exceptions too.
Exactly. Understanding the why makes the whole system seem more coherent and, frankly, more learnable.
Okay, so not just the what, but the why. That could make grammar feel more intuitive. What about the idea that grammar rules are just fixed, arbitrary, almost? Does the book tackle that?
It does. It argues against grammar being totally arbitrary.
Yeah.
Even something like the ed ending for past tense in English, which might seem random, can be seen as conveying a kind of conceptual remoteness or distance.
Remoteness, that's quite abstract.
It is maybe too abstract to teach directly, but the point is there's often an underlying system or logic, even if it's not immediately obvious. Language isn't just a random collection of rules.
Interesting. Okay, another one. That feeling that there's always one right way to say something grammatically. I know I strive for that sometimes.
The book really pushes back on the one right answer myth. While sure, there are standard forms, especially in writing, speakers often have a range of grammatical choices to express roughly the same meaning.
And those choices aren't random.
No, they're influenced by psychological factors like what you assume the listener knows, what you want to put focus on, and social factors, politeness, your attitude, your relationship status with the other person.
Ah, so it's about making choices based on the situation.
Exactly. Language use is often about navigating options, not just finding the single correct form. That's a key insight.
That makes so much sense. Think about asking someone if they're going somewhere, are you going downtown? Versus, aren't you going downtown? Slightly different feeling, different expectation.
Precisely. Different nuances. And then there's the big one. Grammar is boring.
Huh? Yeah, I think many learners feel that. I certainly have at times.
Me too. But the book suggests it's often how it's taught that makes it dull, not the grammar itself.
So bad teaching makes it boring.
Often, yes. It contrasts rote drills, like transforming sentences over and over, which can feel pointless,
Oh.
with more engaging activities that spark curiosity, like Diane's 5 changes exercise, where students guess what she changed about her appearance. Suddenly, you're using grammar for a real interactive purpose.
That sounds way more interesting than fill in the blanks.
Right. The key insight is that engagement transforms the experience. Curiosity and inquiry make a huge difference.
Okay, last one for this section. What about the idea that some learners, maybe young kids, don't really need explicit grammar teaching?
The book clarifies that. It depends what you mean by grammar teaching. Very young children probably don't benefit from learning abstract rules, metalinguistic labels.
Right.
But they absolutely benefit from developing an understanding of how the language system works. So it's not about avoiding grammar entirely, but finding age-appropriate ways to help them notice and internalize patterns, maybe more implicitly.
So grammar isn't static, it's this dynamic process, grammaring. And language itself is always changing. How does that constant evolution fit in?
Well, the book points out that linguistic descriptions, the grammars we write down, often present a kind of static snapshot. They have to, right, to analyze it.
Like freezing a frame in a movie.
Exactly. But language in use is always shifting, always evolving. New words appear, meanings drift, structures get used in slightly different ways. The key takeaway is grammar isn't fixed in stone.
You mentioned Saussure, Lang, and Perrault. How does that relate?
Right. Ferdinand de Saussure, a key figure in linguistics, he distinguished between Lang, the abstract, shared system of a language, like the blueprint,
Okay.
and Perrault, the actual individual acts of speaking or writing, all the specific utterances people make. He focused mostly on Lang to create a stable object for study.
So he kind of set aside the messiness of real-time conversation.
In a way, yes. But other linguists have dived right into that messiness. The book mentions David Brazil's incremental grammar, looking at how we build sentences word by word as we talk.
Ah, like assembling it on the fly.
Yeah. And Paul Hopper's idea that grammar isn't just a fixed template in our heads, but something that's constantly being sort of renegotiated in the moment through interaction.
Renegotiated. I like that. It feels true to how conversations actually work. We adjust and adapt.
Exactly. Which leads to this idea of the participation metaphor for learning. It's not just about acquiring knowledge about the language.
It's about becoming part of the community.
Yes, joining the flux of doing, as the book puts it, rather than just aiming for the permanence of having the knowledge.
So grammaring really captures that active participation. Now, the book lays out 3 key dimensions: form, meaning, and use. Can you break those down? How do they help?
Sure. This framework, form, meaning or semantics, and use, pragmatics, is really central to the book's view. Form is the how word or structure is pronounced, spelled, its bits and pieces, morphology,
Correct.
how it fits into sentences, syntax.
The physical shape of the language.
Right. Meaning is the basic dictionary definition. And use is the when and why. When is this form appropriate? Why choose this form over another in this specific context?
Okay, form, meaning, use. Got it. Can you give a quick example?
Think of the word house, form,
Mm-hmm.
how it sounds spelled House. Plural is houses, meaning building people live in.
Mm-hmm.
Use, knowing when to say house versus maybe home, which has emotional weight, or dwelling, which is more formal.
That makes sense. All 3 are needed to use it properly, but the book says distinguishing meaning and use can be tricky.
It can be, yeah, because context influences meaning so much. Sometimes people talk about pragmatic meaning, the meaning something has in a particular situation.
Oh, right.
But the book argues learners still need to grasp the core meaning that exists outside a specific context, too. It's a balance.
So they're distinct but intertwined in real life, and teachers don't have to teach all aspects of all 3 for everything, right? That would be overwhelming.
Oh, definitely not. The key is awareness. Teachers need to understand the whole picture form, meaning use for any grammar point so they can make smart choices about what to focus on for their specific learners at that time. You can't just ignore one dimension completely.
Okay, let's circle back to rules and reasons. We touched on it, but it gets its own chapter. That link between grammar and rules is super strong in people's minds.
It really is. And understandably so, given history. But the book hammers home that point again. Understanding the reasons behind the rules is crucial. The why makes the what stick.
Can you give us another example of a seemingly random rule that actually has a reason?
Okay, how about using a or an after there is? Like there's a snowstorm coming, why day?
Because it's one snowstorm.
Sort of, but the deeper reason is the function of there is are in English. It's often used to introduce new information into the discourse. And in English, when you introduce a new countable noun that the listener doesn't know about yet, you typically use a or an. If you said, there's the snowstorm coming, it implies we already knew about this specific storm.
That makes total sense. It's about new versus known information. And knowing that helps you teach it better.
Exactly. Instead of just one picture where everything is shared knowledge, you could use contrasting pictures. What's in your picture that's not in mine? Oh, there's a tree by the river. It naturally prompts the target structure because you're introducing something new.
That's clever. Applying the why directly to the how of teaching. The book also talks about subtle meaning differences, like infinitive versus gerund after certain verbs.
Right. Stop to talk means you stopped in order to talk. Stop talking means you ceased the action of talking. Tiny grammatical difference, totally different meaning. Understanding those nuances gives learners much more precision.
And things like word order, give the book to John versus give John the book. That choice depends on what you want to highlight.
Often, yes. It connects back to that idea of putting new or important information towards the end of the clause. There's a system at work.
Which brings us neatly to the grammar of choice. Debunking that one right answer idea again, and really focusing on the use dimension, the social reasons for our choices.
Absolutely. Even when the basic meaning is the same, we choose grammatical forms based on social stuff. Our attitude, who we want to be seen as, our relationship with the listener. Grammar is a social tool. That's the key insight here.
Can you give an example of grammar showing attitude?
The book has this little dialogue snippet. Someone says, Jane bought a Volvo. John then said something like, Maureen's got one. By bringing Maureen into it, maybe someone they both know, his grammatical choice subtly shifts the focus and conveys something, maybe surprise, maybe comparison, maybe just association. It prompts a reaction because it's not just a neutral fact.
It's the implication behind the choice. What about grammar and identity? How does that work?
Our grammar can signal all sorts of things about us. Personality research mentioned links. Personality ties to how often people use modals like might or should.
Yeah.
Age, think about teenage slang or grammatical quirks, like the use of like.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Also, origin, social status, group membership. The way we use grammar says a lot about who we are or who we want to align ourselves with.
And that has big implications for teaching dialects, right? Not
Yeah.
just treating them as wrong, but just different.
Exactly. It's not about saying one way is inherently better, but about making learners aware of their linguistic options and the social meaning or consequences attached to those options in different contexts, empowering them to make informed choices.
Okay, so grammar isn't just sentences, it's discourse too. What does the grammar of discourse mean?
It means looking at how language works above the sentence level.
Mm.
How do we string sentences together to make a coherent paragraph or a whole conversation or an essay? There are grammatical principles for that too.
Like how texts hang together.
Yeah. The book uses a scrambled paragraph exercise. You mix up the sentences of a good paragraph, and suddenly it makes no sense. Why? Because you've broken the links.
What kind of links?
Things like pronouns referring back reference, using words like one or do so to avoid repetition, substitution, using related vocabulary, lexical cohesion, leaving words out that are understood, ellipsis. These are the threads that weave sentences together.
It's like the glue holding the text together. The book also mentions theme and rhyme. Sounds technical.
It's a way to look at information flow within sentences and across them. The theme is usually the starting point, often known information. The rhyme is what comes next, the new information about the theme.
Okay.
Good writing often picks up something from the rhyme of one sentence and makes it the theme of the next, like the Red Sox won last night rhyme. The new theme, referring to Sox, played a great game. It creates a smooth flow.
Gotcha. It guides the reader or listener along. And verb tenses, how do they fit into discourse grammar?
They create the temporal texture of a text. Sticking to a consistent tense helps the listener follow the sequence of events. Jumping around randomly, even if each sentence is okay on its own, makes the whole thing confusing and disjointed.
Right, you lose track of when things are happening.
Exactly. Maintaining a consistent time perspective is crucial for coherence. And there are other things too, like tales and spoken language, adding bits at the end for clarification or emphasis.
Okay, we've looked at what grammar is, how it works. Now, how do people actually learn it? This brings in second language acquisition, SLA, research. What's the big picture from SLA?
Right, the so what question for learning. SLA studies how people learn languages after their first one. A key point the book makes, drawing on SLA, is that while some grammar might be picked up implicitly through just exposure,
Like kids learning their first language.
sort of, yeah, but for many learners, especially adults, some focused instruction really helps. It can speed things up considerably. It argues against the idea that you can just leave grammar entirely to chance.
The book mentions different SLA theories, universal grammar, empiricism. Can you give us the nutshell version?
Okay, super quick. Universal grammar, UG, suggests we're born with some innate language blueprint, and learning a second language involves tweaking the settings or parameters of that blueprint.
Okay.
Empiricist views, on the other hand, stress learning from experience, noticing patterns in the language you hear and see, and figuring out the rules from that data. Inductive reasoning, basically.
And connectionism. That sounds like brain networks.
It is. It models learning as strengthening connections between neurons. The more you encounter a pattern, the stronger that neural pathway becomes, like building up statistical probabilities in your brain.
What about learning chunks of language, like phrases?
Yeah, that's important too. Learners often acquire multi-word chunks like I don't know or have a nice day as single units first. Later, they might break them down and figure out the grammar inside. These chunks or lexico-grammatical units might be building blocks for rule discovery.
Interesting. So, multiple angles on the mental processes. What about developmental sequences? Do learners follow a set path?
Research suggests they often do, for certain structures anyway. There seems to be a fairly predictable order in which learners master things like, say, negation or question forms, regardless of when they're taught.
So teaching the hard stuff early might not work.
It might not change the order of acquisition, but it could still affect the rate how quickly they move through the stages. It shows learning is gradual, developmental.
And it's not all in the head, right? Social context matters. Vygotsky.
Absolutely. Learning is social. Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, the ZPD, is key here. It's that sweet spot where a learner can do something with help from a teacher, a peer, that they can't quite do alone yet. Interaction is crucial for pushing learning forward.
Okay, but the big debate. Does explicit grammar teaching actually work? Krashen said no, right?
Krashen had his non-interface position. Basically, consciously learned rules don't become automatic language use. Acquisition happens subconsciously through understanding input.
But other research disagrees.
Yes, quite a lot of research suggests that explicit instruction does help, especially for certain complex rules or for speeding up learning. It seems conscious knowledge can feed into the subconscious system. The debate isn't fully settled, but the evidence leans towards explicit teaching having value.
And the idea of noticing is important here.
Crucial.
Yeah.
Proposed by Richard Schmidt. You have to consciously notice a grammatical feature in the input for it to become intake, something your brain actually processes for learning. Just hearing it isn't enough. You need awareness.
So learning grammar seems to involve a mix of things. Understanding, getting meaningful input, paying attention, interacting.
Exactly. It's complex, no single magic bullet.
Which leads to practice, actually using the language, speaking, writing. What's the role of this output practice?
Well, there are arguments for it. Merrill Swain's idea of comprehensible output suggests that trying to produce language pushes you to be more precise, to notice gaps in your knowledge when you can't quite say what you mean.
Like testing your own hypotheses about the language.
Right. And it helps you negotiate meaning with others, which can lead to getting input that's better tailored to what you need.
Are there downsides or arguments against output practice?
Some argue it's not strictly necessary for acquisition itself, just for fluency. And forcing output too early might cause anxiety or reinforce errors if not handled well.
What about the psychology of practice, going from knowing about something to doing it automatically?
That's the information processing view. Practice helps convert declarative knowledge, knowing the rule consciously, into procedural knowledge, using the rule automatically, without thinking.
Like learning to type or ride a bike?
Exactly. Practice builds automaticity, freeing up your brain to focus on the message, not just the grammar mechanics.
Okay, so practice seems pretty important for actually using grammar fluently. How can we make practice effective? Any key principles?
Meaningfulness is key. Practice shouldn't feel like pointless drills. It needs to be engaging, ideally communicative. And it should focus on the actual learning challenge. Is it the form they struggle with? The meaning, when to use it? The practice should target that specific dimension. Techniques like TPR, total physical response, or even just focused repetition can help if done meaningfully.
What about mistakes? Error correction. That can be tricky.
Very tricky. The book warns against the comparative fallacy, just at comparing learner language to a native speaker ideal and seeing only deficits. Errors are natural, developmental.
But we can't just ignore all errors.
No, but feedback needs to be strategic. It might be unclear, inconsistent. The book suggests focusing feedback on emergent forms, structures, the learner's just starting to grapple with. That's where they're most ready to learn from correction.
And how to give feedback, just tell them they're wrong.
Probably not the best way. Techniques like recasts, gently rephrasing their utterance correctly, or elicitation prompting them to self-correct are often more helpful. The goal is awareness.
Okay, so bringing it all together, the book ends by suggesting grammaring is like a fifth skill, alongside reading, writing, listening, speaking.
Exactly. Defining grammaring as the ability to use grammar structures accurately, meaningfully, and appropriately in real time. It's not just background knowledge. It's an active skill you develop.
That's a powerful idea, making it a core skill.
Yeah, the ultimate takeaway is that mastering a language isn't just about words and rules. It's about skillfully using grammar to get your meaning across effectively and appropriately for the situation.
So what are the big implications of thinking about it this way for teaching or learning?
Well, it means focusing on awareness, both the rules and the reasons. Continuously figuring out what the specific challenge is for learners. Being proactive in teaching to fill gaps or tackle things learners might be avoiding.
And maybe being more flexible with syllabi.
Yes, seeing them more as checklists than rigid sequences, integrating grammar into skills work, spacing out practice over time, horizontal planning, encouraging experimentation and a supportive social setting.
And those filmmaking techniques, slow motion, zoom.
Right? Creative ways to help learners notice details. Zoom, understand the flow, slow motion, and then put it back together in real-time communication camcorder view. It's about managing attention and restoring fluency.
So, to wrap up this deep dive, grammar isn't just static rules. It's this dynamic skill, grammaring, involving form, meaning, and use. It's learned through active engagement, practice, social interaction. Understanding all this helps us learn and teach more effectively.
Absolutely. And maybe final thought for you to mull over. Reflecting on your own experiences learning or teaching grammar, which of these ideas Grammaring, rules versus reasons, the three dimensions, discourse, learning theories. Which one resonates most with you right now and why? Perhaps digging into some of those SLA names or pedagogical ideas might be your next step.
It really is an ongoing journey, isn't it? Understanding language. We hope this conversation has given you some useful perspectives to take with you on your path.